Number 10. Japanese Island Caves. The remains of 6 Japanese soldiers have been discovered inside a cave that was previously sealed for the last 70 years. The soldiers were killed during a battle on the island of Peleliu, and their corpses were forgotten for almost a century. It was one of the most brutal battles in World War II, starting on September 15, 1944. United States Marines landed on the island of Peleliu in the Western Pacific, a small piece of land only 6 miles long. But that was 6 miles of territory controlled by the Japanese. The airfield here needed to be extinguished so the American forces could continue pushing towards the homeland. But this wasn't exactly easy. The Japanese defenders of the island stayed in underground caves and bunkers to try and protect themselves while the Americans bombed them from above. The battle went on for over 2 months, with 11,000 Japanese troops hiding in underground caves. The U.S. finally seized the island on November 27th, suffering 1,800 casualties. The Japanese suffered about 10,000. The skeletons of the soldiers just discovered were killed in such a secluded cave that nobody found their bodies until now. That's how good the Japanese were at holding down the fort. Number 9. Truk Lagoon. Truk Lagoon is filled with the bones of lost vessels from World War II, including ships and airplanes. It's basically a marine cemetery and the result of one of the most brutal naval battles in human history. The Americans absolutely crippled the Japanese Imperial fleet that had a base in Truk Lagoon, decisively shattering all major marine capabilities of the Japanese. But the result was that hundreds and hundreds of vehicles were sunk pretty much in the same spot. Today, the Nippo Maru cargo ship is sitting upright at about 354 feet deep. This ship was devastated during Operation Hailstone in 1944 by 3 bombs. Then there's the Shinkoku Maru, another Japanese vessel, a giant oil tanker that was destroyed by bombs and torpedoes. The Heian Maru is here too, a ship that was once a luxury passenger liner. It's actually the largest wreck anywhere in the lagoon, sitting sideways at a depth of only 30 feet. The Heian Maru is one of the greatest places to dive in Truk Lagoon. You can literally swim through the rusty hull that was blown apart by torpedoes, claiming the lives of 18 men on board. Number 8. Undeveloped film. Not all war discoveries are made underwater. Photographer Levi Betweiser made a pretty fascinating discovery of his own at an auction in Ohio back in 2014. He discovered 31 undeveloped rolls of film shot by just one soldier throughout his time in World War II. Some of the rolls were labeled with locations like Boston Harbor and Lucky Strike Beach. We don't know much about the soldier other than that he had an affinity for film. We don't even know his name or if he ever returned from overseas. After 70 years collecting dust, Levi developed every last roll of film. He had a whole photo album of pictures. It was like taking a time machine back to the past. Soldiers crowded on vessels on their way to the fighting, the picturesque European landscape before it was bombarded by German tanks, supply convoys moving down old dirt roads, and weary soldiers slouched by the railroad tracks. Number 7. The Bismarck Nazi Supership. Decades after it sunk, the Nazis' largest battleship is making a comeback. We have to go back to 1939 to when the Tirpitz was first built. It was one of 2 Bismarck-class battleships designed by the Nazis just before the war began. And like a lot of the machines back then, the ship was designed to be extremely intimidating. It had a massive length of over 823 feet, it took 2,000 sailors just to man the thing, and it had a battery of approximately 8 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets. It also had enough room on it that it could carry 4 normal-sized airplanes. The Tirpitz was sent to Norway, which the Nazis occupied quite easily when the war broke out. The ship was then given the task of disrupting British supply lines and preventing the Allies from invading the area. But they couldn't hide the ship because it was way too big. The Norwegian resistance transmitted information about the ship wherever it went. The Nazis even tried to camouflage it by chopping down trees and turning the boat into a floating forest. Finally, in 1944, 30 Royal Air Force bombers sunk the Tirpitz. It went down off the coast of Norway and was just discovered like a horrible hulk at the bottom of the ocean 70 years later. Number 6. Plane in a field. A Danish schoolboy discovered the wreckage of a plane from World War II in his family's field near the town of Birkelza. It crashed back in the 1940s, but nobody ever got around to removing the debris. The plane became a little more lost with each passing season as nature grew over it and the vessel was buried under loose soil. But even though the wreckage had vanished, the family still knew it was there. Well, they kind of knew. When young Daniel came home with a school assignment to write a paper on World War II, his father remembered an old family story about a plane crashing almost into their house. Just for fun, the father picked up a metal detector and took his son out into the fields. They were looking for a plane that neither of them thought was actually there. But then they found scraps of metal and human bones. It turns out that a Messerschmitt Bf 109 did indeed crash in one of the fields near their farm during the war, and the German pilot's bones were still inside. The pilot, who was removed by the proper authorities and not the schoolboy, still had his documents and papers in his pockets. We're pretty sure the kid got an A on that assignment. Have you ever done a school project on World War II? What kind of grade did you get? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. The Munich Bomb. If you've watched videos from our channel before, you've probably heard us talk about unexploded bombs from World War II being discovered all over the world. They've been found in Germany, in England, and in the US. They've also been discovered in people's gardens, in their backyards, and under the city streets themselves. But in most of these cases, thankfully, nobody's ever really been injured. That all changed on December 1st, 2021. According to police in Germany, a bomb from World War II exploded at a construction site in Munich and injured 4 people. One of them was injured seriously and might die. We don't have too much information right now because this literally happened recently, just hours ago. The bomb exploded next to a busy railway line. The state interior minister for Bavaria says it was a 550-pound piece of unexploded ordnance, though there's no word yet on what type of bomb it was or how it went off. Number 4. Nazi artifacts. A shocking trove of original Nazi artifacts was uncovered at the end of a hidden passage in Argentina. International investigators were searching the property of an antique collector near Buenos Aires when they uncovered his secret collection of Nazi artifacts. They were stashed behind a fake wall in his library, down a secret passageway, and inside a room stuffed to the brim with illegal Nazi relics. The artifacts found include a bust of Adolf Hitler, boxes covered in swastikas, and a weird medical device once used to measure the size of a person's head. There were plenty of other strange items found too, most of which once belonged to some of the highest-ranking Nazis in Germany. So far, investigators say this could be the largest collection of Nazi memorabilia ever seized in Argentina. The security minister Patricia Bullrich even told the Associated Press that the officers discovered photographs and negatives that will not be released to the public. These photos show Adolf Hitler himself using the artifacts, specifically a Nazi magnifying glass. The photos are a way to prove that the artifacts are real and that the evil Nazi ruler once touched them with his own evil hands. Number 3. The USS Sachem. The USS Sachem, at least what's left of it, is currently abandoned in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. During its life, this vessel had many names. It was known as the Celt, the USS Sightseer, and even just the Circle Line 5. It launched in 1902 and was supposed to be a luxury ride for some railroad mogul. In other words, a toy for a rich guy. But when war erupted and the Navy needed small, fast vessels to combat the German U-boats, the toy became a weapon of war. It was renamed the USS Sachem and given machine guns. It didn't turn out to be the most useful war machine though, and it was later given to Thomas Edison, yes, the famous inventor, so that he could conduct experiments on new ways to destroy German submarines. But he lost his funding, the military took away his yacht, and in 1918 the war was over. From here the ship became a fishing vessel. In World War II, it was used again by the Navy, this time equipped with sonar equipment and tasked again with guarding the US from U-boats. A guy named Robert Miller purchased the thing in 1986. Madonna used the ship as the backdrop to one of her music videos, and then it ended up anchored down in the Mississippi River, left at a small tributary of the Ohio River where it remains in ruins to this very day. Number 2. The SS Leopoldville. In 1984, Clive Cussler discovered the wreckage of the SS Leopoldville at the bottom of the English Channel. Even though he discovered the wreckage, nobody's actually gone down to the bottom of the channel yet to get a good look at it. We simply know where it is, and that's enough to talk about one of the most tragic stories from World War II that not a lot of people know about. It was Christmas Eve, 1944. The SS Leopoldville, a Belgian troop ship, left England with 2,000 American soldiers from the 66th Infantry Division, bound for France. All they needed to do was cross the English Channel, only 5.5 miles. But they never made it. The German submarine U-486 ambushed the troop ship, sunk it with torpedoes, and killed 763 American soldiers. 515 went down with the ship, and 248 died from drowning or hypothermia. Almost none of the American soldiers were recovered afterwards. And here's where things get horrifying. It wasn't until 1996 that information about the attack became public knowledge. The American Army ordered complete silence on the matter, with all soldiers ordered not to speak of it, and all letters sent home censored. Even though the war ended in 1945, it'd be another 51 years before the US government admitted what happened. Number 1. The SS Empire Heritage and her Sherman tanks. The SS Empire Heritage was constructed in the year 1930 as a 15,000-ton steam tanker. Its first use was in South Africa as a whale factory ship. That was until in 1941, when it hit a mine and was put out of service. The ship was salvaged the next year, repurposed, and handed over to the Ministry of War Transport, and it was back in service as a military vessel in February of 1943. In her first life, the ship was an accidental casualty of war, but in her second life, she was a very intentional victim. In September of 1944, while the ship was en route from New York to Liverpool with a cargo of Sherman tanks, she was attacked. The German submarine U-482 fired a pair of torpedoes at the ship, and she went down like a rock. 113 people were killed, the ship broke apart and landed on the bottom of the ocean, and her entire cargo of trucks and Sherman tanks were lost to the waves. They remained unseen until 1995, when divers discovered the ship and her cargo. The tanks and trucks are still scattered across the bottom of the ocean, still in almost perfect condition, 210 feet deep. Number 10. The T-95 Supertank. Russia has a long history of designing some pretty bizarre prototype weapons. Normally, these prototypes never actually reach the construction phase. But the T-95 Supertank, built at the end of the Cold War, was indeed built as a tank to end all tanks. Had development continued, the T-95 probably would have been the scariest tank in the world. But the technology was eventually abandoned in favor of the less interesting T-14 Armata. The tank was part of the Object 195 project. Designing started in 1988 with the idea to make a heavy tank that would outclass all NATO armor. This meant the crew members were stuffed into an interior compartment with the turret being unmanned. The tank was also fitted with explosive reactive armor and composite armor, along with soft kill systems whose capabilities are still unknown to this day. It was also given a 152mm 2A83 smoothbore gun, which boasts an amazing muzzle velocity of around 6,000 feet per second. The tank also had 152mm howitzers for firing all manner of artillery rounds. But alas, they actually only ever built one single prototype. The T-95 tank was simply too big and too bad for this day and age. They went with the T-14, which comes equipped with more technological features like jamming capabilities. Number 9. The Rolling Rocket Bomb. The rolling rocket bomb was one of the worst ideas in military history. It was designed to kill Nazis, but instead it killed somebody's dog. The rolling rocket bomb is actually known as the Panjandrum, and it's arguably one of the biggest flops in military history. The British concocted this bizarre device to break through the German defenses when storming the beaches of Normandy. Here's how it worked. The engineers attached rockets onto two giant wheels joined together by a drum axle. The axle was lined with deadly explosives. The rockets were supposed to propel the wheel up the beach, and then the bombs would blow up the Germans. In theory, this sounded great, but the technology totally bombed, pun very much intended. When they tested it out, the Panjandrum flew up the beach, the rockets dislodged, and the whole thing exploded. An army officer's dog chased one of the rockets down the beach and was killed in the attempt. Immediately after, the technology was abandoned. Number 8. The Failed Nazi Rocket. The V-2 was an utter failure of Nazi technology. Each V-2 rocket was about 46 feet high and carried a ton of explosives, literally. In the autumn of 1944, the Germans used their newly developed rocket technology to attack London. The very first V-2 rocket plunged down onto the city, gouging out a 32-foot crater and killing 3 people. These were a massive upgrade from the V-1 flying bombs, but not quite revolutionary enough for Hitler to win the war. It was a kind of last-ditch effort to defeat the British, but it didn't work. They fired over 1,300 of these missiles at England, Belgium, and France. Perhaps 2,700 people in Britain were killed, according to the BBC. But it could have been up to 20,000, including those who died constructing the V-2 rockets. One of the biggest deals about the V-2 rocket was that it used an automatic guidance system. It was one of the first rockets programmable to hit a particular spot while being operated by a controller on the ground. In that way, it wasn't really a failed technology, just a failed attempt at victory for the Germans. When the Germans lost the war, the Americans and Soviets scrambled to get their hands on the tech first. It would be the Russians who captured the V-2 factory and their test range, then reverse-engineered the technology to use it for themselves. Number 7. The Wind Cannon. The wind cannon was developed by the Germans as a weapon that could create an artificial tornado. The whole idea was that the Germans could fire their wind cannon at enemy aircraft, creating a literal tornado that could destroy entire squadrons of planes. Weirdly enough, the Germans actually did a pretty good job. They created a vortex cannon that could create a tornado of up to 900 feet tall. The issue is that they couldn't get them tall enough to actually destroy any aircraft. The only thing they managed to destroy were wooden sheds. This weapon was called the Windkanone. It worked by filling up a large pipe with combustible gas, then sending the gas into a combustion chamber to spin a turbine. The rotating nozzle then released the gas into the atmosphere, drawing air into the rotation to create a vortex. It was a perfectly sound science, but it was honestly way ahead of its time. The wind cannon was abandoned, and as far as we know, nobody tried to build one since. But seeing as it's been almost a century, our advancement in technology probably means that somewhere out there, somebody's military knows how to make artificial tornadoes. How do you feel knowing there very well could be a machine out there capable of creating a massive tornado? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Curving bullets. The Krummlauf was another of Germany's failed secret weapons. It was a curved barrel clamped onto the end of a gun so that soldiers would fire bullets around obstacles. The original idea came in 1943 with the Germans thinking they could use a curved barrel to redirect bullets. One was made with a 30-degree bend and the other had a 90-degree bend. These would be mounted onto armored vehicles with an MP-44 caliber rifle sitting in a vertical position. The curved barrel was pointed through a port and attached to a swivel. The crew inside the tank could fire at the enemy all day long without ever being shot at themselves or hit with explosives. But, of course, it didn't really work. Bullets almost always broke in half as they traveled through the device, or the device itself would break. At best, the gun would fire maybe 100 rounds before completely falling apart. Number 5. The Ice Ship. An inventor working for the British Combined Operations Headquarters, one of the departments of the War Office, thought it would be a good idea to create an unsinkable island ship made completely of ice. The ice ship would be the best way for the Allies to prevent German U-boats from destroying all their vessels. The idea actually led to a small prototype being built in secret, approved by Winston Churchill himself. And when I say a small prototype, I mean a giant floating piece of ice that weighed 1,000 tons. Geoffrey Pike was the inventor of this bizarre contraption. Pike envisioned a gigantic ship made from ice instead of steel. But in reality, the ship would be built from ice and a pykrete mixture of wood pulp and frozen water, with the wood acting as reinforcement. The prototype was commissioned in 1943 to be constructed in Canada. The model, just 30 by 60 feet, was built on a lake in Alberta and kept frozen through the summer by using just one motor. It was actually quite successful, and a real ship was ordered to be built out of 300,000 tons of wood pulp, 25,000 tons of insulation, 10,000 tons of steel, and 35,000 tons of timber. The issue here, as you might have guessed from hearing all those numbers, is that it ended up costing way too much money. The ship would have been a mile in length and weighed over 2.2 million tons. The project was scrapped because of financial issues, and the technology has been abandoned ever since. The prototype can still be seen today at the bottom of Patricia Lake in Jasper National Park, Canada. It's still there, totally abandoned. Number 4. Forgotten Sea Forts. The Maunsell Army sea forts were used by the British during World War II to defend the shoreline. The forts were built as part of the Thames Estuary Defense Network, with anti-aircraft towers that doubled as forts built in 1942. Each fort was a cluster of stilted buildings branching out from a central command post. No aircraft could get past these forts without the British knowing. They were pivotal in keeping the Germans out of England. But after the war, they lost all relevance. There are only 2 left standing today out of the original 3, the Red Sands Fort and the Shivering Sands Fort. Originally, they were decommissioned in the 1950s. The Nore Army Fort was damaged by a storm and then struck by a boat and dismantled. The remaining forts were occupied by a pirate radio station in the 1970s. As recently as 2005, an artist named Stephen Turner squatted in one for 36 days and then wrote a book about isolation. As you can see, the abandoned forts have had quite the history. You can still see them on a clear day when standing on Shoeburyness East Beach. But nobody's actually allowed to go there, as they're considered extremely dangerous and are going to fall into the ocean at any time. Number 3. Cultivator No. 6. The Cultivator No. 6, also known as the White Rabbit No. 6, was a machine designed by the British Royal Navy for digging trenches at the start of World War II. The machine was lightly armored, it carried no weapons, and its purpose was to allow soldiers to advance on the enemy position while burrowing underground. The machine would dig a trench as the soldiers advanced behind it, thereby giving them a constant trench to hide in. Then when the machine reached the enemy, it turned into a ramp that the soldiers could climb up. This sounded like a really good idea, but the problem was that it weighed 130 tons. It was an absolute beast, and Britain was only able to manufacture a small number of the machines. In the end, none of them were even used in combat. It just wasn't effective at actually breaking through enemy lines like Winston Churchill had hoped. He'd wanted this machine to turn the tide of trench warfare, but it did no such thing. All the machines were abandoned, about 33 of them, and never used for anything. Number 2. Antonov AN-24. The Antonov AN-24 comes to us from the Cold War era, a twin turboprop aircraft that is actually still in operation today. The Russian Air Force is still using the Antonov right now, though their numbers have dropped significantly and they've needed to be modernized. The first Antonov prototype was back in October of 1959, with production ending in 1979. There were around 1,300 of these transport aircraft made, with only 100 still in active duty as of 2020. China even made their own copy of the plane called the Y-7. There are also a lot of different variations of the Antonov. The AN-24 was designed strictly for battlefield conditions as military transport. This included anything from VIP passengers to general cargo. The truth is that these awesome planes weren't a failure at all. The technology simply got outdated, and hundreds of them were abandoned across the world. The only people who actually still use them are Russia, North Korea, Afghanistan, Cuba, and Bangladesh, just to name a few. Number 1. The Hypersonic Nuke Missile. Reports have been coming in lately that China is currently developing a hypersonic nuclear missile engine based on a design originally abandoned by NASA. This hypersonic missile engine will theoretically propel a nuclear weapon at 6,000 miles per hour. A Chinese research team has allegedly already built and tested a functional prototype. The prototype was based on a radical design put forth by NASA over 20 years ago, only to be abandoned because it was considered too costly. This new weapon allows a nuclear weapon to travel at over 5 times the speed of sound. The original technology comes from the Boeing Manta X-47C, developed back in the early 2000s and then abandoned by the US government because they thought it was too expensive. But as China's military rapidly advances, money doesn't seem to be an object for them. They've now allegedly built their own hypersonic missile system with an impressive range of over 1,500 miles. And at 6,000 miles per hour, well, a missile can reach its destination with startling haste. Number 9. Rivers and Canyons, Titan. It's wild to think that there are physical similarities between our own planet and the moons orbiting some of our solar system neighbors, but as it turns out, that is the case. In 2013, the Cassini spacecraft from NASA observed Saturn's epic moon of Titan to get a clearer picture of what the largest of Saturn's moon's surface looked like. The results were pretty surprising. Not only does the moon have rivers and canyons like ours, they're also made up of some rather funky material. The rivers are full of methane, meanwhile the canyons contain liquid hydrocarbons or liquids that come from natural gas. Measuring 0.5 miles wide and running up to 1,900 feet deep, it's unclear how they came to be. Erosion is naturally assumed to be a cause, as that's what happens on Earth. But this is far from a given. Other factors such as geological disturbances might be responsible. These rivers and canyons all head for Titan's Sea of Ligea Mare, forming a network that experts have dubbed Vid Flumina, Flumina meaning rivers. While the astonishing natural features run deep, it seems we haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to exploring our neighbors amongst the stars. Number 8. Ice volcanoes, Ceres. While volcanoes are associated with extreme heat, did you know that some can be cold as well? We're talking seriously cold. These are what are known as cryovolcanoes, and examples of them have been found in space on the surface of the dwarf planet Ceres. How are we aware of this? Because NASA launched a probe called Dawn to check out stuff going down in the asteroid belt. In 2018, it was reported that a bunch of cryovolcanoes had been spotted on Ceres. What these volcanoes do is erupt like the regular ones we see on Earth. However, instead of molten lava, these former peaks let fly with stuff such as water, methane, and even ammonia. We're not sure which is worse, blazing hot magma or this cosmic cocktail. You're in trouble in both options, right? Once it's released from the volcano, the contents freeze in the atmosphere. The Dawn probe has been studying the dwarf planet Ceres for a while and initially noticed a cryovolcano standing at an incredible 13,000 feet, which was called Ahuna Mons. Turns out this wasn't the only icy eruption example, but one thing's for sure, it's certainly the youngest. Mind you, when we say youngest, it's all relative. Ahuna Mons is apparently 240 million years old. Because of its youthful age, Ahuna Mons is pretty noticeable. It didn't look like there were other ice volcanoes on Ceres, but experts reckoned they would have collapsed. Once they looked at the situation with this in mind, they began seeing the remains of once proud cryovolcanoes. Dozens of examples that are staggeringly billions of years old once spewed their contents onto the planet's surface. This is exciting because where there's water, it's possible that life can exist. Might a volcano be responsible for shining a light on alien life out in the asteroid belt? Watch this space, or rather, this particular part of space. Number 7. Right-angled planets HD 3167. Planets are generally thought to orbit the Sun around the equator. Not all of them do, however, as this cosmic couple demonstrate. First observed in 2016, planets HD 3167c and HD 3167d, don't you just love names that roll off the tongue, can be found in a solar system 150 light-years away. Existing within the orbit of Mercury, these worlds are at right angles to their Sun. One is tipped toward the north and the other the south, as opposed to where the equator is in the middle. How come? Well, good question. One planet takes 30 days to complete an orbit and the other just a single day. These worlds are classified as super-Earths because of their comparable size to our planet. One theory about their crazy trajectory is that one planet may have exerted an influence on them, resulting in this right-angled situation. Either way, it puts a new spin on our understanding of the universe. Spin? Get it? This is a great example of how just when you think you've got the laws of space figured out, along comes something that changes the game. Number 6. Opportunity Robot, Mars. While it's truly incredible that we can put a robot on the surface of Mars, that doesn't mean things will run smoothly. NASA found this out back in 2018 with their Opportunity rover, nicknamed OPI. It had been trundling around on the red planet for 14 years till a natural phenomenon put it out of action. What kind of phenomenon? An epic dust storm that spelled big trouble for poor OPI, because it relied on solar power and the sun's rays were shut out by the dust, so it had to go to ground. When that happened, the rover needed to rely on battery power. Mission Control then played a waiting game. Could they make contact with OPI and rescue the little guy? The answer to that question is no, sorry to say. Experts don't know if the robot's solar panels got wrecked by dust, but that was the last they heard from OPI. NASA did manage to spot the rover sitting in the Valley of Perseverance inside a crater. However, the mission has been declared officially over. The team gave it till 2019, then waved goodbye to their little friend on Mars. Number 5. Mysterious Exoplanet. We're used to the idea of planets inside our solar system. Everyone learns about them in school, but naturally there are a ton of worlds out there beyond Mars, Venus, Saturn, and the like. Venture further outside the boundaries of our solar system and you'll spot other planets that are called exoplanets. An exoplanet orbits a star beyond our own sun, of course. Our solar system exists in a galaxy called the Milky Way, in case you needed a refresher. And believe it or not, several thousand exoplanets have been found in the Milky Way. Heck, there's so many that exoplanets are in danger of becoming just another thing you can see through a telescope. For something a bit different and more exciting, you need to look around beyond the Milky Way to other galaxies. We hadn't picked up on any exoplanets outside our little patch of the universe until this year, it seems. NASA reported detecting signs of an exoplanet in the distant destination of Messier 51. This is a spiral galaxy situated some 23 million light-years away from Earth. What's a spiral galaxy? The easiest way to describe it is a swirl of galactic activity. Another name for Messier 51 is the Whirlpool Galaxy, which should give you an idea. What's notable about this story is also the method used to detect this exoplanet. Typically, a transit method is employed by which disruption to starlight is recorded. Well, in this case, the disruption has been recorded via the X-rays coming from the spiral galaxy. X-rays were studied because they are produced to a significant degree by Messier 51. By using X-rays, experts might theoretically be able to notice more exoplanets outside the Milky Way. Just one little thing, however. They aren't 100% sure this is an actual exoplanet. In order to confirm the discovery, they must wait for the next time X-ray disruption is observed. We hate to break it to you, but this could take 70 years. Why so long? That's down to the enormous distance between us and the spiral galaxy. Sorry, we don't make the rules. Still, it will be pretty exciting when we find out, right? Do you think that there could be intelligent life on one of the many undiscovered exoplanets outside our solar system? Let us know what you think in the comments section down below, and if you haven't already, go ahead and like and subscribe to our channel as well. Number 4. Kepler 78b. There are planets out there that are pretty much the same size as Earth, but it can be difficult to work out what they're like on the surface. One unique example where we have a good idea of this is Kepler 78b, which was reported on back in 2016. What makes it unique is that we've got measurements for not only its size, but also its mass. The size was worked out according to the way it blocked light from its sun. As for the mass, that's calculated based on something called the radial velocity method. In essence, looking at how powerful its gravitational pull is and whether it makes the sun wobble as stated in reports. Yes, it's possible for a star to wobble. Don't ask us how that works, it's a whole video in itself, okay? From this comes the density readings, which indicate the presence of a lot of rock and iron on Kepler 78b. Located out in a constellation known as Cygnus, the planet is approximately 400 light-years away. So we're thinking it'll be a while before we can travel out there to see the surface for ourselves. Number 3. 7 planets TRAPPIST-1. In 2017, NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope picked up a surprising sight some 40 light-years away from Earth. Not just 1, but 7 exoplanets were observed orbiting a red dwarf star. There are so many red dwarfs in our Milky Way that they're classified as the most common type of star. The star is named TRAPPIST-1 after the TRAPPIST project, or Transiting Planets and Planetesimals Small Telescope based in Chile. So what are these 7 exoplanets like? It took a few years for experts to assess what might be down there, but they recently came to the conclusion that they all have very similar terrains. Remember what we were saying about how Kepler 78b's dimensions and such were calculated? It's the same sort of business here. The exoplanets are all of low density, which experts reasoned may have been due to high levels of water. However, this doesn't appear to be the case. The planets appear bone dry. They're the same sort of size as Earth, but on this initial research, it looks like they're very different in makeup. Number 2. Mars tsunami. Tsunamis cause devastation on our planet, but is it possible they also happened on Mars? Footage from the red planet shows a pretty dry-looking landscape, so seemingly not. However, research is highlighting the possible triggering of many tsunamis back in the days when Mars theoretically had an ocean or network of lakes. When we say back in the day, we're talking billions of years. The more we explore on Mars, the more it seems likely that there were places to splash around. Talking of making a splash, that's exactly what experts reckon a landslide did in Mars's ancient history. The slide appears to have taken place on the slope of Olympus Mons, which is the planet's biggest geological feature and situated in the northern hemisphere. It's an astonishing 16 miles high. The presence of dramatic markings plus ridges show that an epic tsunami may have washed across the planet's surface. How big was the tsunami? It's estimated at between 25 and 43 miles long. The ridges we mentioned earlier were possibly caused by the landslide coming to a halt. Now, we should make clear that this is guesswork, albeit highly educated guesswork. Still, there's been evidence discovered of similar episodes where objects falling from the sky made contact with what's presumed to be a body of water. Where there's water, there's life. So this adds an extra dimension to the discovery. Was an ancient alien marine ecosystem disturbed by an enormous tsunami? Or are experts misinterpreting the data, and this is some whole other thing altogether? Whatever's going on, this is an eye-opening and surprising discovery that lifts the lid a little further on the mysteries of Mars. Number 1. Donut Earth. What is a donut Earth? Well, there's a straightforward answer for that. It's the Earth, only shaped like a donut. Yep, that's really as wild as it sounds. Where does the idea come from? A theory which was reported in 2017. This suggested that before our planet became the round shape we know today, it was more of a disk with a hole in it. Surprised? We don't blame you. The newish theory states that the formation of Earth began with what they call a synestia. The word was invented from syn, or together, and then estia, who is a goddess of structures. And how is this supposed synestia made? It happens when two planets smash into one another whilst spinning. The momentum is believed to sort of fuse them together, at which point they develop into a kind of rotating donut. Another curious feature about this theory is it's based partly on studying ice skaters and the way they move. After becoming a spinning donut, the mass then has to cool down. Following this process, it is thought to form the familiar and spherical shape of a planet. It doesn't happen straight away, of course. We're talking about a century for everything to come together. Then we guess at some point down the line, the planet may spin into another planet and the whole deal starts over again. Is it possible we're sitting on the remains of a couple of planets? That sure is a crazy concept. Also, if the Earth was created this way, it stands to reason for some that the Moon could have once been a synestia. Thanks for watching. Are there other surprising discoveries from other planets you think we left off the list? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.